Well, welcome back. I hope that you learned some things in last lesson, particularly related to getting the data from your computer into RStudio so that we can finally actually start doing some work with it. Remember that over the course of the semester, we're trying to add more tools to our toolbox. And I think that getting data into R, getting data to give the to give you the ability to actually start working with it is an incredibly important toolbox because up to this point we've kind of assumed that you had data sets available or the data were very simple enough that you could create them from scratch. But most of the time in public health data sets, that's just not the case. So the last lesson I think is very important in terms of getting your data off of your computer or out of the internet into your computing environment where you can start working with it. One other thing that we covered in the last lesson was the pipe operator, and it's very important. I do want to just kind of remind us a little bit about how the pipe operator works. And I'll go back again to the end of this lesson here, and I want to call into your mind the fact that whatever this argument is, so if I'm chaining operations together, the pipe operator is going to put the argument as the first, put this object as the first argument of this function. So right here, when I'm doing this t-test, the x right here is the first argument of the t-test, which means that the pipe operator will put the x right here in front of mu equals 1 and add this comma, okay? So it's very important to understand this, that whenever you're chaining these operations together, it's whatever the output of the previous operation is put in as the argument, the first argument to the next operation. So just wanted to, I don't know that if I know I showed this to you, but I wasn't sure if you had picked up on this dot, and that dot being very, very important, that the y actually goes right here as the first argument of this function. And you can see the way that we wrote the function k, whatever this function is, the first argument is y. And so y goes in as the first argument of the function k with the argument specified e, like some additional argument here. Then the output of this operation goes in as the first argument of the function j with this additional option d. Then the output of this calculation goes in as the first argument of the function h with the additional option c, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're going to see that, and with the homework, you were supposed to work like these exercises. You're supposed to kind of get understanding, like experiential understanding of how that works. But again, what we're seeing here is that the baby names object goes in as the first argument to the filter function. So right here, if we were seeing it in sort of standard R code, it would be filter, the first argument is the object baby names, but the pipe operator allows us to extract this first argument and move it outside as a previous step in the pipeline. And the benefit, again, is just that you get code that's easier to read, easier to check step by step. So let's get back into the purpose, like one of the main reasons why, and that is we're going to be building data cleaning pipelines with a package called dplyr. So dplyr is, in English, there's a tool called a pair of pliers, and I'll show you what this, so pliers. Okay, these things right here. It's like a lever with a mouth on the end, and as you move the lever, it's going to put force on a bolt or force on something, and it allows you to work with whatever it is easier than just using your hands. Okay, it's a simple tool. It's using the power of a lever, and it gives you some extra force and extra torque so that you can unloosen a bolt or pull out a nail or whatever it is that you're trying to do. So that's what a plier is in English. It's called, often in English, it's called a pair of pliers. But the idea of dplyr is that it is a set of pliers for Ds. Well, what are Ds? Ds as in data frames or tibbles, okay? Because remember, they were called data frames long before they were ever called tibbles. And so when this function was first created, they were still called data frames. So here's a like this holdback to the older naming convention for rectangular spreadsheet data in RStudio and R, is that they were called data frames. So this is dplyr, or a pair of pliers for data frames. Now, obviously, we're working with Tibbles, this modern data frame, but still think about this package as a pair of pliers that will allow you to do more work with this spreadsheet than you would have been able to do on your own or without it. So here's the overview. There are a bunch of groups of functions that dplyr that come in dplyr. So one of them is the filter function, and you can think about this if you've worked with Excel. I'm going to go back to using examples of working in Excel because a lot of people are familiar with this. Filter is just like adding a filter on a column to say I only want to preserve the rows, or I want to like highlight the rows with a particular condition. So show me all of the males in my data set, or show me all of the people in my data set who are at least 18 years old, so forth, stuff like that. The next thing that we're going to learn about is sorting rows with arrange. So it's really just we're sorting. Do we sort ascending or descending? It's I mean, computationally, it's a little bit challenging when you get into sort algorithms, but we're not getting into that. It's just for us, it's going to be a very simple idea of find the largest number and either put it at the top or put it at the bottom. Or if you're sorting alphabetically, find the A's, put it at the top, or the A's at the bottom. The other thing that we're going to talk about is moving columns around, like reordering columns within the spreadsheet, and also pulling out particular columns that we want to keep, or pulling out columns we want to discard in the spreadsheet. We can do all of that with select. Technically, we can also rename columns with select, but there is a rename function specific for that that I recommend that you use because it makes your code a little bit easier to read and understand. Another thing that we're gonna work on is how to create new columns, and this is with so a lot of times you're gonna engineer variables. There's an entire chunk of data science, if you will, that's all talking about engineering variables. So taking data that you have in your spreadsheet and manipulating it in some way, maybe doing some transformation, or maybe scaling it one variable to another, or the pretty standard normalization where you take the variable, subtract from the mean of that variable, divide by the standard deviation of that variable to get z-scores for that calculation. So these are all things that we can do with the mutate function. The mutate function is going to add on a new column based on some other information in the data. And sometimes it's just adding on new columns that sometimes you add on a row indicator. And it doesn't really have anything to do with the values in the data set itself, but it has to do with like its position in the data. So anytime you want to add a new column, you're probably going to be working with mutate. Whenever you want to collapse data and find grouped summaries, so like, okay, well, we want to find the average test scores for all of the 9th graders versus the 12th graders. Well, simply calculating an average of the column is not going to be good enough. What you would want to do is group by the grade level, say, okay, well, here's 9th grade or 12th grade, or O levels versus A levels, or males versus females, or whatever, treated versus non-treated. Those kinds of operations are going to be handled with the summarize command. And group by is a helper function for the summarize command, but there are also arguments within the summarize command itself that will handle grouping. And then finally, this one, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this in these lessons. I am hoping to have a guest lecturer that will be able to come in and talk at length about using the join functions. But so we're going to have little shorter videos on the join function. However, because they're so incredibly important, I'm hoping to have a guest lecturer come in person to talk more about using the join functions. Basically, the join functions is going to be like a data scientist bread and butter in terms of how to deal with data that are in multiple tables. So most of the time, you don't have just one spreadsheet of data, but you end up with a very large, what's known as a relational database that are joined by keys, where you have like a social security number or a patient record number or a participant ID number or something like that. If you're dealing with geographic data, your key may be a census tract ID or a zip code or a county, but you have information in many different tables, and you need to connect that information across multiple tables or across multiple spreadsheets. And that's where the join functions come in. And like I said before, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about them in this lesson, but that's not because they're not important. That's because I'm hoping to devote an entire lesson with a guest lecturer just specifically to the join functions. I don't believe that those will be recorded on this channel though. I'll have to, we'll see how it goes with the guest lecturer. Okay, so that's a bit of what we're going to, it's kind of like the high level overview of what we're going to learn throughout this lesson on dplyr. And I think we will pause there and then pick back up with the common functions to talk through exactly what they do before we get into filtering. So I will see you next time.